everybody. Darren Littlejohn here. Welcome to episode 19 of the 12-Step Buddhist Podcast. Back after a 3-year hiatus and working with the super easy iPhone 5S podcast setup. It's awesome. Works well, sounds good, and putting out regular shows now. So glad to see so many downloads of the show. I mean, it's huge, going up to like, I don't know, it's going up to like 4,000 a month or something here. So you've already had 1,700 downloads of last week's show on September 30th, and pretty awesome. So I speak my mind, and some people like it. So that's really cool. It's a good outlet for me, and I hope to trigger some thinking and hopefully just contribute to thought about recovery, about spirituality, about Dharma. I had intended on doing this a while back, and I generally just have replied to these emails one at a time, but they kind of have a tendency to get backlogged. So I apologize to people who have sent questions if I've missed them. It's hard to tell because sometimes I answer it on the phone and then I look on my home computer and I can't tell whether or not that email's been opened or whether it was, not. So anyways, I'm going to do my best to try to answer these. You can always ask a question at ask.the12stepbuddhist.com. And a lot of times people just ask me stuff, how do you deal with higher power in Buddhism? I always just say I wrote the 12-Step Buddhist to answer that question, and you should read that and ask me questions after that if that's unclear in some way. So on those, I usually refer people to the book or the books. But this one is kind of an interesting question. This is from Mark in Arizona. I'm just going to sort of change his grammar a little bit here, but just in general, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I do not have an issue with anyone's higher power concept. I'm drawn to Buddhism after 15 years of recovery, and yet I still feel some fear of not following the big book's idea of HP, yet still drawn to Buddha. I feel Buddhism truly heals suffering, but so frightened that I'm not working the program if I make Buddha my higher power. It feels like why to trouble with this thought. I need reassurance like a child needs it to follow my Buddha search. And this is something just struck me about the humility and the heart of that last sentence. And I actually occasionally say things like, if somebody's really kind of over intellectualizing, I might say, explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old. Make it simple so that we can understand what you're saying. So it's a really interesting point. In recovery, being in 12-step for 16 years straight this time for me, coming up soon, and I followed the traditional ways of going into recovery. And one thing we have to understand, and I am writing about this in depth in the 12-step yogi, which I'm working on now. When you're new in recovery, you need to follow a different path. You can't just be brand new and jump into Buddhism instead. I don't think. I mean, it's just in my opinion, but I don't see it work. I was explaining this recently to some people in the media. Being an addict is a fringe of society. I mean, you're on the outlier of the bell curve, right? And then being in 12-step is the outlier of, only 1 in 10, they say 1 in 10 alcoholics makes it to AA or whatever, right? And so you're in 12-step, you're an outlier of an outlier. And then people who come to me and to groups like, in works like the 12-step Buddhist and the Power of Vow and Perfect Practice, and, people who go to probably other things, are an outlier of the outlier of the outlier. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's super fringe, man. It's like fringe of fringe of fringe. And the people who come to me are generally very broken and very like chronic relapsers and really unwilling to or unable to really follow the traditional 12-step model. And they are always looking for an alternative. And I've said it a million times. I've written it. I've said it. There's no alternative that I know of. I work with an integrated recovery system. And that's an easy word to throw out. It's a little bit of a buzzword these days. And some people have whole models, around the idea. But what it takes to truly integrate is a much deeper practice than is obvious on the surface. And I'm going to be explaining more about this as we go. I started it in The Power of Vow, integration, not separation. So that was a principle that I started to write about there. But what I'm trying to say is that when you're brand new, you should do the same thing that everybody tells you to do. Go to 90 and 90, get a sponsor, sit down, shut up, and listen. And, don't make a lot of noise. And don't sit there complaining about how blah, 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 and saying how much resolve you have now and this time it's going to be different. Just shut up. You sweep the floor, make some coffee, be a greeter. Just leave your ego outside the door. Don't speak out against how AA is this or NA is that, or the theology or the God talk or the I'm Buddhist or this or that. Just stop it, please, for your own sake and for everybody else's sake. And just sit there and listen and get sober and get sane for a moment and work through the steps in the traditional way. And I'm going to be working with some systems. I know, pretty sure Noah Levine's got a new book coming out about how to, be in recovery as a Buddhist. I'm not sure he's got kind of a program approach to it or something, but I've sort of expected that from him for a long time. But the idea that I have that I'm working on is going to be something that you can really follow and sort of use what you need to in order to create for yourself a system that works. But in the beginning, you really don't have, your brain is not together. Your brain is fried from being drugged out and whatever, and you got to get straight in your head. You got to get it tight, like my friend Joe says, and tighten things up. So once you're a little bit stable and able to be calm and do your work and be sober and not be chronically relapsing and being dramatic and blah, blah, then you can start to get into some things. Now, I'm not saying you can't meditate 5 or 10 minutes a day or go to a meditation group or something or study Buddhism. It's just that please don't do that instead of getting yourself together, because it's very difficult. Buddhism is actually very advanced. And it's, it takes a lot of guts and it takes a lot of determination and it takes a lot of sanity to really try it. I mean, Buddhist places don't traditionally deal with crazy people. They kind of shut the door. I mean, at least in my experience. And I mean, I feel like the 12-step rooms are fantastic for this reason, despite any criticisms and the validity of those criticisms. Okay? I think I should make that point every time I open my mouth, because people, for some reason, don't really understand that. So do that. Typical stuff. And, then when you're like this person, 15 years sober, still feeling the guilt, still feeling Christian guilt, it sounds like, still feeling, the theistic approach, the monotheistic approach, the childhood trauma of, God is watching, or whatever it is. I don't pretend to know. Deal with it in therapy. Explore those issues. It takes time to deal with the deeper traumas, right? And, I just concluded a 12-year run with my psychotherapist. 12 years, because I'm moving down to San Diego in a couple of weeks. And we have talked about everything: recovery, spiritual, yoga, Buddhism, jazz, everything. And I've worked out a lot of issues as part of my spiritual path in a therapeutic context. So I can't say enough about that process. For me, it's been vital. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of commitment and determination to heal. So I support you in getting some therapy and finding out why you have this deeper sense of guilt about not being able to choose your own higher power, when the big book, if you understand in principle, the AA big book we're talking about, it says you choose your own conception of God. Just the fact that they say the word God doesn't take into consideration that there are other higher power concepts. I did write about these in the 12-Step Buddhist. I think it was step 2 and step 3 particularly. I mean, the power of now, right? The moment can be your higher power. How things are in this moment. Surrender to that instead of your bullshit, right? Instead of your thinking, instead of your attitude and your narcissistic tendencies, blah, blah, right? There's a lot. It's easy. If you just think it through, it's easy to just turn it over and practice being present in the moment. I mean, practicing mindfulness is surrendering to the moment. So, I mean, you don't need a concept. It's the higher power non-concept, right? It's not the anti-concept. It's just the freedom of not needing to have a concept, right? Surrendering to what is. You try that, you know. You like the idea of Buddha. You like the idea of a concept. You like the idea of a deity, a figure. That's fine. That's a tool. That's one way that we can approach a higher power. And you have to, I mean, my friend said this to me in a recent conversation. He said, you really have to go with to thine own self be true. I mean, one thing that I've done, this is a little bit to my own detriment over the past 5 years or so, is I was so afraid of people in 12-step not accepting me because they thought I was trying to be a guru or something, And I really resisted trying to start a foundation or call myself a teacher or, try to make money or anything like this, And yet I still got hate. I still got criticized. I still got slandered. And I still got, nasty emails and weird, just weird vibes from people in meetings and so on. So it's really been complicated. And I would always say, the group is open and it's someone would walk in and say, well, I'm here to find a teacher. And I'd say, okay, I'll help you find one. I'll try to plug you into some Tibetan lamas or something, But I was never trying to be anybody's one-on-one, and what have you. However, over the years, the reality is, Kevin Griffin sat here in my kitchen when I interviewed him for the podcast on his second book, and he said, well, you are a teacher. You teach. Because I like to say I'm a facilitator, So, okay, fine, I teach. But, what do I teach and how do I teach it? I've really come to own that voice as a yoga teacher over the past few years because you're teaching when you are teaching. And so people say, well, I'm just a guide. I'm just okay, fine. You're trying to sound humble. But in reality, if you're explaining stuff, you're teaching. So what I'm trying to say is that I would sit on the cushion in the meditation hall and start kind of like channeling Buddha. That's what people said it sounded like. I'm not saying that. It's kind of, I just feel like what's coming out is my expression of Dharma. And sometimes it was, pretty interesting stuff. And we would really get some conversations going on the retreats and the groups and so forth. And by the way, I'm going to be starting these in San Diego. So if you're interested in that, hit me up on Facebook, send me an email, find me on Twitter, whatever. You know how to find people. So let's get it going when we get down there. So what I'm saying is that I would sort of overly dumb it down when I would go to a meeting. I would be like, hey, like one of the guys, like, hey, dudes, more like trying really hard not to be seen as somebody who's trying to be the teacher. Because people in 12-step wholeheartedly resist teaching. They wholeheartedly reject out of hand anything that they think is religious or dogmatic. I wrote about this BS of throwing the Buddha out with the bathwater by rejecting things as dogmatic because they have a little bit of structure. We're anti-structure because we want to do what we want to do, And there are ways to extract the essence of teachings and to understand the essence of teachings without drinking the Kool-Aid. So you got to have some skill to develop to do that, and I've talked about it in the Power of Vow, and I think in depth, and I think I dealt with that kind of idea of oh, well, we're not dogmatic. Well, okay, yes, you are. And dogma isn't necessarily all bad. You just have to understand what's happening and not be brainwashed and take what you want and leave the rest. Hello, ever heard that in a meeting? Take what you want and leave the rest, right? So my point is that I would not do to thine own self be true. I would be I'd be sitting and teaching, and then I'd be like, hey, dudes, what's going on, And they'd just look at me like, well, which one are you? People would be confused, unable to process it. Is this the guy who, is the teacher, or is this the guy who's the crazy addict, And when I went through some stuff a few years ago and was feeling pain, because you got to feel the pain to heal the pain, write that down. You got to feel the pain to heal the pain. And I tried to process it in meetings, and it was ridiculous. People had no idea how to handle it. I mean, people had no idea how to handle it, and it was just not appropriate for me, actually. So what I'm saying overall here is to let own self be true. That means that I'm the person who sits on the cushion and teaches Dharma. I'm the person who walks around the yoga studio, bringing people into their breath, into their body, into their energy, into their mind, into their movement, into their principles, into their situation, into their deeper awareness. Hopefully that's what I'm trying to do, And when I'm in a meeting or outside a meeting or what have you, that's still who I am. If you don't like that, it's your problem. If you need some help from me, holler. If I can, I will. If you have criticism or fear or are unable to process your own feelings, call your sponsor. I don't know what to tell you. Do you know what I mean? So I just say that because you have to be tough. You have to be willing to. I mean, one of my original sponsors, Johnny Owen in San Jose, he said you've got to develop mental toughness and emotional maturity to be sober. And I thought, wow, I didn't know that. I mean, that was like 1984 or 5 when he told me that. I'm still trying to figure it out, right? It's like I was in a meeting the other night, and there was somebody who had misunderstood something that I had said as a joke and sent me some really derogatory, profane email on Facebook, and then they made some lame, half-ass attempt to make amends to me and didn't even want to listen to what I had to say about it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I saw this person, and I was like, man, I'm real. You know how I feel right now in this moment. I'm feeling a little bit, feisty, and I'm trained. I've trained myself in recovery. Restraint of tongue and pen. So I spoke to another individual who has 6 or 7 years sober. And they mentioned the word emotional maturity, and as soon as they said that, it rang like a bell. It was like, hey, you just ruined my ability to have justifiable anger here, so thanks. And emotional maturity and, the wisdom that comes from experience and, the tough, the thick skin that you have to have. If you're going to do something that's a little bit alternative, Jim B's son, Kevin, old Jim B, people from Saturday Night Live group know who I'm talking about. Kevin just told me, my pops used to say, when you're on the firing line of life, you're going to get shot at. And when you put yourself out there and you say something a little different and you're not in the middle of the bell curve, you're going to get flack. And you got to have the guts. So you might just study Buddhism and keep your mouth shut. You might say, in my version, when you share, you might say, well, when I did my second step before, it was like this, and when I did my second step, now my conception of higher power has changed. Just put it in general terms. Don't freak anybody out, Be compassionate and sensitive to the sensibilities and the capacities of the people that you're around, right? You can't make people see it your way. You can't make them understand if they're whatever. So you just do your program. Hey, work your own program. You ever heard that thing in a meeting? Keep your own side of the street clean. Great. So you can do Buddha. You can do whatever you want in your higher power, and you're not breaking the rules. Actually, you're doing what it says to do. The world's libraries are full of information. Go follow it. Find your own. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We want this book to help you find a power, a higher power, a higher power. Think about it. You're making a higher power into something else. What's the higher power? It could simply be a higher principle. How about the principle of acceptance? Accepting things as they are in this moment. This is like a yoga practice. I'm in hot triangle. I accept that my hips are tight and I can barely breathe and my shoulders hanging over the mat. And now that I've accepted that, I can try to breathe, put my pressure on the outside of my right foot, open my heart a little bit, draw my belly in. I'm accepting while I'm trying to proceed and trying to expand and deepen, It's the same concept. It's like you can practice acceptance. That's a higher power than the initial impulse, than the fear-based reaction, right? That's a higher power. So just open your mind, and that's great. I mean, that's amazing. There's power in that, and if you feel that Buddhism is something that truly heals suffering, then you've got the karma to understand that, sir. You better not waste that. That would be a travesty for you to not acknowledge that it is truly a gift to even have the karma to listen to the Dharma. Okay, so I feel like, you should do that and follow up with it and follow through with it, and you don't have to really change it. Maybe you don't talk in meetings for a year while you get your studies together and while you get your meditation practice together, while you explore different things. When you sponsor people, maybe you can say, I've sponsored people who are like super Christian and stuff, and I'm like, great. Have you thought about higher power this way? Have you thought about it that way? Well, in your version of higher power, does it work for you this? I'm not trying to convince them of something. I'm trying to help it work for them. Help them where they are. Buddha taught to the people at the level they were at in the moment. You got to deal with the circumstances. This is what my teacher always says. So I feel like that I've answered that question. I mean, you got to be true to yourself. To thy own self be true, and that doesn't mean to my own, narcissistic, egoic, addict, His Majesty the baby kind of tendency. It's to my own heart and my own desire and my own interest. I've been interested in Eastern philosophies, practices, teachings since I was a child, whether it was through martial arts or other things. So I really feel like, for me, that's natural. Other people are mildly curious. Other people are locked in. As soon as they hear about it, they know it's real. They know it's true for them. So I think that answers that question pretty fully. If you're afraid, man, I think the program. I think if you've got 15 years sober, I think that that following the fear is not really the solution, is it? Right? You got to go with your gut, and write about it a little bit. Go to a retreat, and remember, you don't have to convince anybody else of anything. Work your own program. I think that's clear. And I'm at 22 minutes. I want to kind of keep it short today. I do want to do another podcast on, Buddhists not looking like Buddhists or feeling like Buddhists, or what does it mean to be a Buddhist, and what are the different kind of ways of being Buddhist that kind of blow people's minds? Like, do Buddhists, are you really spiritual if you have sex? Are you really spiritual if you're not celibate? Are you spiritual if you get angry? What does it mean? And look at the conceptions and the misconceptions that people have, and how to deal with some of that, processing it, how I've dealt with it, how you might consider looking at it. We can look at some teachings and see if we can apply that. So in the meantime, you guys, I am on my way down to San Diego at the end of this month. This is being recorded in October of 2013. These podcasts do stay up forever, so if you're listening to this in 2021, hey, what's it like? Has Google created a biochip that goes in your brain and lets you index the universe yet? They're probably all, yeah, they did that 5 years ago. Anyways, you guys stay on the path, keep breathing, be kind, be open-hearted. Hopefully I'll see you at a meditation group or yoga class soon. D out.